for another installment, I suppose, of environmental justice in North Carolina. Today we have with us Alexandra Valladares. She is an organizer, educator, musician, circle host, GPS parent, and professional affiliate with the Leadership for Sustainability graduate program under the Rubenstein School of Environment and Natural Resources at the University of Vermont. So she's super impressive, is pretty much what that says. She works collectively with community members in Durham on environmental and climate advocacy, community and civic engagement, language access, health, resilience, and education through the Boost Science Program, a STEM pipeline program for underrepresented students in the sciences. She's also on the Durham Public Schools Board of Education. Her fluency in Spanish, French, and English allows her versatility in communicating with diverse members of the community, and her passion is to tend to the ecosystem of relationships that underpin the social realities of the Latinx, Indigenous, and Black communities in Durham. So again, she's amazing. We're so looking forward to hearing from her today. I'm going to pass it along to her. Let's have a round of applause for Alexandra.
I need to unmute. Thank you so much. It's so good to be here tonight. Just grateful for the invitation to be in the space and to share with you and to talk about some of the work that I'm doing. But most of all, I want this to be a conversation. So I did bring some slides. I do have some pointers and the general things that we do with presentations. But for the most part, I definitely want to introduce myself and want to tell you a little bit about my story. And hopefully you can definitely interact with me in the chat, or we can even have some time for questions towards the end, if that's okay. And thank you all so much for introducing yourselves. I do see shout outs to Chris and Lillian and Angela, Leah, Rishab, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Annie. Thanks so much for the chats, and Rashida, thank you so much as well for coordinating with me over email. So my name is Alexandra Valladares, and I am originally from Honduras, Central America. So I was born in Honduras in a place called Tegucigalpa. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of such a place called Tegucigalpa, but that's where I was born. And it's been a story of coming to the United States when I was a child, and appreciating the journey and appreciating a lot of the parallels, and also the complexities and the differences. And so a lot of the work that I do as an organizer is based on my story, on my unique story. And I think that a lot of the work that, the ways that we do the work, the things that are very important to us definitely have a place in story. So I have just a lot of interest in using that framework for a lot of the things that I do, and the connections that are established through sharing our own stories. So I'm going to go ahead and see if I can start. Well, let's see. Hold on a second. See if I can start a little bit of a PowerPoint here. All right. Okay, so I think everybody can see this. And I may not be able to see all of you at once, so if anybody has a question, you can raise your hand and I'll look to our moderators and co-hosts for help if there's anything. But so I'm here to talk to you about the Latinx community and environmental justice topics here in Durham and surrounding areas. And so all of this work in terms of the Latinx community is not isolated. It doesn't come as a silo, right? Like a lot of the work that I do is intersectional. So as an organizer, I have done work around resilience, around immigration, around climate advocacy and affordable housing, and so many different things. I think that that's the richness of organizing, that you come across the different things that the community is asking for, things that the community is interested in doing, and then you go from there and you continue to figure out how to mobilize. And so this picture right here that I'm sharing with you all is actually one of the sweetest moments in organizing, and it is about all of us coming together. And this was not during COVID, this was pre-COVID. we came together to talk about what is most important to us. What are those topics that matter to us? And so a lot of folks brought like their individual items from the house, and we shared food, we shared experiences, and talked about Durham, and ways that that we can organize and figure out how to support community members in that way. So I have done my own internal search as to what is important to me, and as you can see, here's a little bit of a pile of leaves, but these are actually from my backyard. But I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about this. When it comes to the work that I do, as I mentioned, it's very intersectional, but it is also about the things that are like super important to me. And in this case, it all has to do with my story, and sharing with other community members, and all of that falls within something called sovereign logic. And I don't know if any of you guys have heard about sovereign logic, but it is definitely based on the results of like your lineage, like who your people are, your relationships in any given space. So what are the relationships you have here? Some of you are students that are from other states, who have started to build relationships here, and establishing those connections. Some of you have had connections here for a long time. And so acknowledging all that, acknowledging what, your relationships are. Also a connection to the land. Like, what is the connection to the land that we're in, to the people, and of course, as I mentioned, the stories. So sovereign logic, it's like, it's at the crux of a lot of the work that I do. And when it comes to environmental and climate justice, the stories of migration for the immigrant community, like it is a story of a journey. So as you are going to go about what matters, like what is important to a lot of folks, you will find embedded in their stories, like the many different ways that the environment is key to many of the decisions that have been made. When I was 5 years old, I came to the United States, and I knew that we had a lot of flooding that was happening where I was living. And so much with the floods that, I knew that my family had struggled to try to like build a little like higher and try to come with as many different resources to try to ensure that the flooding would be reduced and mitigated. That continues to be a story of the people of Honduras. We had a really massive hurricane in 1998. It was called Hurricane Mitch, and it's 1998, and even to this day, people will still remember. And as you can imagine, in Puerto Rico, when we had Maria, it's been 2 years, and yet, it's the same thing. It's like there's still vestiges, there's still debris, there's still destruction, there's still things that are still being rebuilt after such a impactful act of nature, right? And so a lot of those stories with having to migrate, with understanding how people are impacted, a lot of those stories are also here in Durham. So as you start talking to folks and you may talk about immigration, you might come to these stories. You might learn, that, that climate change has been experienced in many different ways through, through hurricanes or through earthquakes, through hurricanes and through like air pollution and other things. And they might name natural disasters, ways that the land where they lived has been impacted. Is everybody doing all right now? I just wonder if, just doing a little check. All right. Great. Okay, so so here's my little diagram. Now, I am an artist, so a lot of the things that I do have to be colorful. I mean, color has been a part of like my culture, and I also like the visual to be able to see many different things. So my connection to community here in Durham, as I mentioned, it is intersectional, and so there's a whole lot with the community advocacy that we do. Social justice causes. So when we think about like policing, when we think about affordable housing, when we think about like crime rates in Durham, when we think about apartments and the issues around trash, issues around where people can access fresh food, food sovereignty and all that, like all of that ties in. So there's a whole lot of things about like the balance, right? Like about like what are some of these ways that community members are affected? What are the burdens that communities hold? And so here in Durham, as you can imagine, we have about 14.7% Latinx. It has gone up significantly over the past couple of years. And during this COVID pandemic, it became pretty evident that the community was, having the highest rates of any group, of any single group. And it got to 77%. And so during those times, I mean, there's a documentary that I shared with Rashida, and you're welcome to check it out. But it was a documentary, by Univision, and just talks about the heroes of the pandemic. But we were featured there because of the organizing around figuring out how to get food to places that, to families that didn't have access to food. And this has been a concerted effort, not just, grassroots, but it's also been institutions that have been providing food and still do. Durham Public Schools, which I represent now as a board member, has also been, delivering food, and DPS Foundation, so many different partnerships. But besides the food, there's also, the need for masks, the need for folks to have what they need, and a lot of the issues around air quality, or even issues around how people are faring with the pandemic. It's very interesting, to kind of see those correlations where you see high rates. I think the data is still being developed right now, and I entertain and I ask, as many of you who have any neat articles to share about that, if anybody is looking at tree canopies, where we have tree canopy and those overlays with the rates of COVID. I think that a lot of the data is still being gathered, but it is something that we look at in terms of the impact on marginalized communities, and how lack of access to healthcare, not having a primary care doctor, not being able to stay home, because you have to work, because you don't get a COVID stimulus check, or you don't get you don't have access to the same resources, right? It has prompted many community members to work. A lot of the incidences of high rates were happening at construction sites with construction workers. And so those are some concerns that we were hearing from community members. Now, you may ask, what is environmental about all of this? What is environmental about COVID? What is environmental about high incidences in marginalized communities? Well, as I mentioned, there's intersectionality embedded in everything. And our relationship to the environment is definitely a relationship also that has to do with the people in the environment. Access to resources is something that is pretty much at the crux of a lot of our issues, and so when it comes to access to to resources, it is about the networks and the ability for folks to have what they need. And so there's a lot with COVID. There's a lot that I can talk about with COVID. I can tell you that there's material that I can send to you guys about that. But during this time that we have been organizing for COVID, a lot of great things have been happening also, just in the Durham community, in the way that it is moving in terms of, we have our city leadership has put some really, really neat goals, right? 2030, does anybody know? I actually want to put it out to the group. Anybody knows any of the resolutions that the city and the county have passed around energy and sustainability? Has anybody heard anything about what the leadership has been doing?
Feel free to unmute yourselves. This is an opportunity to unmute yourself here, if people know.
And guesses are totally fine, because these things that happen at the city and the county, that happen in government, are definitely impact us. And so if you have any ideas for...
I could jump in with a guess. I think I might know what you're talking about. Around becoming 80% carbon neutral by 2030, 100% carbon neutral by 2040. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. So it's 2030. Yeah, 2030, 80%. So, these are pretty good goals, like in a resolution. They're pretty awesome. And we want to be able to move towards these things. We want to be able to move towards sustainability. Um, we want to be able to move towards a green New Durham, which is something else that I have been a part of through a group of organizers and community advocates in the People's Alliance. Also, there's a group called the Environmental Coalition, and that group has been pretty neat about, like, supporting advocacy. So all these different efforts. I was pretty much doing some work and some introspection on community benefit funds. How are some of the ways that community members can pitch in, can be a part of a Green New Durham? What are some projects that would be interesting to families? And so there's a survey, and the survey is being analyzed, um, and the responses to that survey could elucidate like what community members want. But one of those things is definitely representation. To this day, I understand that the methods that we use to gather data, whether it's surveys, focus groups, and all that, like that there are some that are more effective in some demographics and some groups than others. And I think with surveys, we're starting to get some survey responses. I recently did a survey around fees with the city. What are some of the ways that the community has impacted with fees? And I got a 23% for the Latinx community response, which is, it's not great. It's also something, because actually survey rates in the community are pretty low. People would rather, they always tell me, just let's have a conversation. And that's why it's kind of hard to do it over Zoom right now. I would love to be able to look into your faces and talk to you all, because conversations are at the crux of how the community tells you what it cares about, tells you how, what are some of the things that they'd like to see happen. And so I put the word in here, community. I put some little things about, like, history, about like having, community bonding events, whether it's like a bonfire, whether it is to be able to come together and have these kind of conversations. But a lot of it, as I mentioned, is about figuring out what is the most important thing. So with the city project that I was mentioning, and this is just an update. So there have been some folks, including Tom Campbell, who's a grandparent. He's with Grandparents for Climate Change. He put out the petition initially, and I was able to translate it into Spanish. The petition is pretty much asking the Durham City Council to revise that franchise agreement with Duke Energy, to determine that, that we need to reduce greenhouse emissions, right? We know we need to reduce them. We know that our city's electric supply, that's one of those significant areas where we can curb some of those emissions. And so the quick summary is that, that franchise agreement with Duke Energy, it talks about how Duke Energy provides electricity to our city, and talks about like transmission lines, talks about emergency services. And what is really neat about what that petition accomplished and what feedback from community members accomplished is that, that now it includes clean power, right? So the city now has the right to produce, to store, discharge electricity on its own, and Duke Energy has agreed to purchase any of this energy that the city wants to sell. If the city acts on these new rights, it would mean that Durham wouldn't need to be as dependent on fossil fuel. So that's a big win. That's a big win from organizers. That's a big win from a lot of engaged folks that are coming to City Council and talk to the mayor, talk to our mayor, Steve Schul, about it. There's also an MOU that accompanied this agreement, and it just talks about, for example, the fact that Duke Energy is going to partner with the city to develop pilot projects to improve energy efficiency of homes and apartments. So that is something. So when I was sharing this survey with families, and I was like, hey, there's an opportunity for us to sign on to this petition, right? the Duke franchise agreement, like, you know, it's coming to that cycle where we can actually like change it. Like we can ask the city to revise it. I mean, this is a prime time. Do you want to sign on to this? And they're like, well, you know, tell me about it. You know, tell me why. What is it about the energy? So as I start talking about like, you know, start talking about Green New Deal and Green New Deal for Durham, that's not the connection that the family is connected to. But when I started saying, do you realize that you know, we have these major energy companies, power companies, you know, how high is your bill? You know, like there's so much about like how, you know, our bills are affected by the environment. We start talking about like the energy efficiency, and they start showing me their bars. Like when, you know, like every time you get your bill, you have like those little bars that kind of say what your home is compared to other homes. And I don't know who has their home under, you know, showing that they're energy efficient. Mine is not, you know, it always does have those things. But, you know, we started having these conversations about energy, and you know, we're talking about low income neighborhoods, and what are those bills like, you know, and in places that don't have a lot of trees. You know, we think about canopy. It's not just because we know that there's health benefits from trees. We know that there's emotional, socio-emotional benefits from the trees. There's a lot with resilience. There's a lot with air quality and all that. But there's also, even just to the degree of energy consumption, to energy savings. If you have canopy, your cooling and heating costs are definitely reduced. So as I was having those conversations, that's kind of like when families were, you know, like, yeah, that makes sense. You know, that definitely makes sense. Now, are they going to sign the petition? Some of them did, not a whole lot. And like I said, you know, we're working towards these methods being culturally relevant and culturally designed in a way that actually capture, you know, what people want to share. A lot of this, as I mentioned, it goes back to conversation. So but it is a win. It is a win when folks are pushing for stuff. But then when, you know, when Tom was like interested and he's like, yeah, let's get this translated. That was definitely an opportunity for me to say, yeah, like I'll translate it. I'll help with this, and then, you know, share it on pages, share it wherever I could. And the other thing is that we are moving towards, you know, solar access, right? We're moving towards having, you know, Durham to develop like community solar projects that would enable broader adoption of renewable energy in Durham. Now, for the Latino community, knowing that number one, homeownership rates are pretty low, right? As a tenant, you're not going to make those decisions about solar panels. Like I'm a tenant myself, right? So you don't get to determine these things. So that topic right there, even as great as it is, and as much as we talk about it, we have to make that connection. One of the ways that I found that was very neat to make that connection was through personal story. I was talking about overseas, and even here in the United States, not going too far, but Puerto Rico. During the time that Hurricane Maria caused all that wreaked havoc in communities in Puerto Rico, one of the things that came forth that was very inspiring was the amount of houses that the amount of communities that there's a community in Toro Negro, and they were completely shut off from everybody else. I mean, the river was like overflowing. There was no way that they could get any access to food. They were completely shut off from everything. And it was such a grim thing to hear about, and to hear the voices of the folks talking about how close they came to, you know, to getting fatalities from like lack of access, and the fact that you know, the response was not great. You know, they talked about water bottles that were dropped, but they were dropped in locations that were inaccessible sometimes. And so, you know, when they finally came to them, the water bottles were all messed up, you know, and so it wasn't the help that they wanted to get. Not everybody got all the help that they needed. But one of the things that came from that was that they started organizing around food sovereignty, and not just food sovereignty. Guess what? Solar panels were part of that. They had a community, like a collective, or one of those communities that was that they decided to buy some solar panels, because during the hurricane, with all that they learned, like, you know, they have to have ways that they can bring about renewable energy, bring about sustainability was at the heart of everything. And so there were a couple of houses, and they had like 23 houses of solar panels. And what every household does is they pay, the usage to the community collective. And I'm probably not using the exact word in el colectivo comunitario. And it was really interesting because this is something that, that they figured out. This is during the time of Maria, like understanding that they have to be set up in a way that is going to allow them to thrive. And so as I start sharing these stories about solar panels, about things, it's like, like folks that are like talking about like, yeah, like that, I'm not a homeowner here, but, that makes a lot of sense, for folks that, that have houses overseas, in Central America or whatever. It's like, that would be such a neat thing. And you start having these conversations with folks. And my point is this, it's like, there's a whole lot in terms of environmental and climate justice that is very noble, that is very needed. Like we need to have, the folks that are out there pushing for, to mitigate the carbon emissions, to mitigate against, unsustainable practices. But we have to make those connections with community members. And we have to understand that everybody has like a story. And so I did have a slide here that I wanted to show you all, and it's about solidarity. So the key to organizing, the key to hearing about what the community wants is knowing that there are many stories behind folks, and I have some quotes on there that you can read. But we have to change the system. We have to change a lot of the ways that community members don't have access to home ownership, right? Because imagine like so many families who would want to do urban gardens in their house, but they're renting. If you live in Duke Manor, you could probably have a couple of pots in, plants in your apartment, but you can't do a perma, culture. You can't do any, gardening and to be able to do the kind of food sovereignty stuff that I saw in Puerto Rico with some of the folks who owned a little bit of land, and then they were able to, have their own produce, their own tomatoes, and then they were bartering, and it was creating this sense of empowerment. Homeownership is at the crux of climate change, and I think that environmental justice, climate change, and racial equity are definitely linked. And so, as I mentioned, there's a whole lot of intersectionality. We need to be able to build solidarity around the needs, around what people actually want. We don't have to recreate the wheel. So often there are so many models to build from and learn from. Even as we do research, you'll see some models. So, we see in Portland, Oregon, where they have the community benefits fund, and that thing is working pretty well. Like the city actually taxes and they have revenue from that, and they apportion monies to the community benefits fund, and then people can, come and ask for projects. If they want to do composting, if they want to do, any food sovereignty related things, they can ask and request these funds from the city. Here in Durham, we don't have that. The city is working towards a composting program, and you probably have heard of a pilot, which is great. But if I, as a community member who is not a homeowner, who does not have access to resources, and I wanted to do something that was around environmental justice, whether it's cleaning up, helping clean up something, a creek, or helping clean up or addressing air quality. How do I get the funds for that? We don't yet have, the benefit of the community benefits fund. And so that is something that I'm very interested in. I know that there are folks that are working towards that. So I can't see the chat. Let me just take a look at the chat just to see if there's anything on there. Yes, thank you. Somebody posted. Yes, very good. Thank you for that. So, so yeah, that's the Portland, and then the Duke Energy. Yep, and the petition, which is in English and Spanish, and I translated that. And also the trees. Yes, all of this is great. You guys are awesome. Okay, so what types of needs are typically revealed through conversations with community members? Very good question. Because as I said, conversation, see, our conversation is key, connections, right? So, the point about that, about what are some of the needs that come up, is just asking, asking the folks. Don't go to the boards. Don't think that you have to go through formal boards, committees, and groups and talk to the Latino community that is already in leadership. Go to the folks. So I live in Durham, and I drive around, and I know that I've been going to the Compare Foods lot, near Avondale, and Avondale and Club Boulevard. And I'll tell you some of the needs that came up as I was talking to community members. As I organized with parents, I came across folks, and I was delivering masks too. So I was helping deliver, the mask during this time, and they were telling me, do you know that we lost our jobs because of COVID, and we need to pay our bills, and what we're doing is we're selling secondhand items. Some of us are selling fruits. Some of us have grow our own fruits, and some we buy from wholesale, and then we sell. And we're in this public lot, and we have no idea who's it seems like the Compare Foods and other folks may not like us here, but we want to find out information. So I was there with two other Latina leaders from the city, and we got the request from them, and they said they needed help. They needed to know because they were in a public lot, and they wanted to be able to sell, and they wanted to be able to stay there. So the needs that they had were, they want to be able to thrive, to sell fruits, to generate income, so economic development, and to do it in a culturally relevant space. So it's not just any space. It's not like they're coming to South Durham saying, we're going to set up shop, right in the 55 or whatever. No, like they're in a space that they felt spoke to them, because that space, Avondale and Club Boulevard, is a very, very special place for them. It has been the location for a lot of activism. Also, One Day Without an Immigrant, like years ago, when there was like there were some rallies around like, what would it mean for us to not have immigrants in the workforce, and so it's a day where everything stops, everybody doesn't work. Not everybody can afford to do that, but the people who did showed up at Avondale, and they were just talking about some of the concerns and some of the things that are important to them. And so that space holds that, and that, those memories. It also has been the place where, food sales have been done for community members who need to pay their bills, like their medical bills. A lot of them don't have access to healthcare insurance or, health benefits. And so they have figured out how to self-organize, and they'll sell pupusas, they'll sell tacos, and they'll set up shop. And maybe you've seen these little tents at Compare Food. So there's all that. There's also, voter registration that has happened there, a lot of activity. And so they really want to stay in that place. That land has significance to them. And so I heard that. I heard, okay, there's connection to land, right? My brain is already like, okay, it's not just about making money, because you can, we can move you and send you to North Durham, all the way in North Durham, and figure out a plot, figure out like anybody who wants to provide a temporary use permit, go through the city permitting, and maybe they can give you a spot there. No, they wanted to stay there. And so I heard that, and I understood, okay, there's an importance of this space. They talked about the fact that they wanted economic development. So it's not just cultural, it's also economic. So I was like, okay, they want to be able to sell, pay their bills, and do that here. And so we organized, and, there are some articles you can look up. If you look up my name, you can look up vendors and then comma my name. It might come up with some articles. I mean, CBS 17 featured something about it. And it's about Latinx community who, asked me for help. And I was like, what do you want to do? And they wanted to share their story. So they went to CCV Plaza, and they talked, and they shared, about the impact of COVID, and wanting to do something that has a really low carbon footprint. What is the carbon footprint of flea markets? I asked, any of you who's interested in a project. I wonder if you guys have any articles about that, but I welcome you guys sending me any articles or any thoughts you have on that, because we're talking about people being outdoors. They're not using, there's like very little energy consumption, right? That happens in a flea market. It's like they have their tables. They're also, reduce, reuse, recycle. I mean, they are selling secondhand items, When you think about consumption habits here, and, the fact that there's a reason why secondhand clothes or secondhand items, it's like you're just, all these benefits, right? Their COVID rates have been zero there at the flea market, the Latinx flea market on Avondale. And yeah, they're outdoors, there's connection, there's bonding. And you can check out Comunidad Durham. I have a Facebook page where we put some of the stuff. And you know, folks are able to support their families, pay their bills. Although some bills, I'm telling you, I've heard some stories from folks where it's, you know, this is about social justice kind of things, where they have $2,000 water bills, and it's because they're tenants. And we have a lot of things with policy that are very situations that are pretty grim. I mean, it's like grim. Sorry. There's a case of a realtor that did not fix an outdoor pipe, and unbeknownst to the tenant, you know, the bill is like $2,000. And in this state, you know, of North Carolina, municipalities don't have the power to waive away, or erase a bill. So this tenant who has a $2,000 bill, who I talked to, you know, at the Latino flea market, he's stuck with that bill. Wherever he goes, that bill follows him. There's a lot with policy. Why does the state curtail the power of municipalities, you know, when there are situations like that? And also, how do you hold landlords accountable? Landlords who know that they have to do the upkeeping because conditions, they have substandard housing conditions, and they continue to, you know, neglect these properties, and the tenants have to foot the bill. Like, the bill is in the tenant's name. So a lot came from that. I did get requests for that, and I'm having conversations with the city. I've talked to folks in the budget office. There is a study right now going on with water bills. There's actively a study right now about water bills. So there's a lot of opportunity for us to plug in civically, for us to be involved. And that question was great because it's the conversations that led me to understand, you know, what are some of the challenges in terms of, like, you know, high water bills, in terms of, you know, living in substandard housing. You know, when we think about McDougal Terrace, the carbon monoxide poisonings, what is that? Is that just a social justice issue? I would say that's an environmental issue. You know, when you have residents having to be displaced and going to hotels for months, and then there was an open sewer outside of building 41. You know, building 41 is very significant to me because, I mean, I lived in that building. So I intrinsically know the experience of living in substandard housing. And, you know, there's also things with, the interesting thing about building 41, I don't know about any other building in McDougal, but, you know, at 6 o'clock, the bats would come out. And so you talk about a complex that was built like, you know, 1920s, and that, you know, that has like guano from the bats, and, you know, it's like the bats just come out at 6 p.m. and these are inaccessible, you know, like they've shut off pretty much like the attics, like they're all shut off. But you have all kinds of critters, all kinds of interesting dynamics in those spaces. Recently, my heart broke when I saw that there was it wasn't McDougal Terrace, it was a different complex off of Liberty Street, and there was a lady who videotaped her apartment and the infestation of roaches. And she has Durham Public School kids, she has little kids, and she put out a petition for help, you know, and you know, Anthony Scott from DHA was like, wow, like, yeah, we definitely need to do better. But would you say that that's just social justice? Or, you know, to what degree do we begin to look at how connected all these issues are? That environmental justice and climate justice are very intrinsically to the quality of life of people. You know, it's tied to the well-being of people. It's tied to, you know, those conversations that people share with you, the ways that they let you see what their lived experience is. And so that has been, you know, that point about make it a point to invite everybody who cares to work on what's possible, acknowledge that everyone is an expert about something. It's key to the way I operate. I mean, it's like, you know, the people who have the lived experience can tell you, you know, what the challenges are. And then if you have access to resources, you have access to, you know, documents and to projects, maybe you can do a project, you know, and look at all these different, and look at the intersection of like for the flea market, then, you know, these people want economic development and cultural, you know, cultural and economic development. And guess what is the carbon footprint of a flea market, you know? For housing, yeah, you know, why do we have open sewers, you know, in a place like McDougal Terrace? And why the carbon monoxide? Is that a case study? You know, is it something that we need to look at, and hopefully no other group, marginalized group, especially vulnerable group, has to go through that of having to be displaced, and having to wonder, you know, if those carbon monoxide scares will cost a life, you know. So I've talked a lot. I'm going to give you guys time to talk to me. Here are some helpful reminders. You can read through them. But I really believe in social movements. I believe in, you know, as I said, community partnerships. Relationship is key to everything. We have to unlearn a lot about our presumptions and stereotypes and, you know, assumptions, mindset structures, especially those rooted in white supremacy and anti-Blackness, which some, you know, come up every now and then to blame the people that are suffering the most, right? I definitely believe in liberation work and just the theories, you know, that we will all be as a society, you know, farther along if we acknowledge, you know, the injustices that we've done with the Black community. So, you know, support Black-led social movements. You know, it's something that also benefits Latino community, because we have not been here that long. The Latino community has a history here in Durham that is, you know, I would say I've been here for about like 23 years. But there's a history that is, you know, way longer, right? And we talk about who built Durham and, you know, the Haytites and the Wall Street, Black Wall Street, and all that history. And so the more that we really center movements and the voices and experiences of Black folks, of people of color, Latinx folks, you know, the better chance we have towards equity and justice. Because social justice, as I mentioned, is environmental, and it is you know, climate justice is racial justice as well. And also leveraging institutional and positional power, you know, acting in true solidarity. And my last one is one of my favorite quotes, and it's from Dr. Saida Pinto, who's my mentor. And it's about the fact that people will rise to the belief you hold about them. What do you believe about people, you know? I think that speaks for itself. And then there's another quote there. And this is actually by Dasan. I should have maybe had. This is Dasan's quote, but it's about adaptation, emergent work, which is very important. Things that emerge as you have conversations with folks. And yeah, anyways, that's my last slide. I'm ready for questions.
Thank you so much for that. And let's all just do a silent round of applause, snaps, all that for Alexandra here.
Thank you.
So we do have some questions coming up in the chat. I know you had mentioned you would love it if it could be more of a conversation. So if people are comfortable unmuting themselves to ask their questions, why don't we start with Zoe, if you're comfortable unmuting yourself to ask your question?
Hi, yeah. So my question, well, let me go back and find it, was just kind of about comparing innovation and entrepreneurship and community engagement, or more civic engagement. And I wanted to see what your view is on how well either one of those can address the social injustices that you see in the Latinx community.
Yeah, so you mentioned the economic and tell me again the
Yeah, so just looking at like community projects where it's kind of community-based work or engagement, community level work, compared to having like a business plan come in and try to address the same social injustice.
Yeah, I mean, it's top down versus grassroots. You know, I think that a lot of the models have been based on, you know, hiring consultants, even out-of-state consultants, to come do the work. When the city of Durham wanted to do the comprehensive plan, you know, we want to update the UDO, they brought in some consultants from out of the state, and some even within the state. And what they quickly found out was that when they started getting all the community in the room talking, there was a disconnect. There was a big disconnect. Trust was not established, and trust is at the crux of a lot of the social movements. You know, you can't really, you have to move at the pace of trust, as Audre Lorde says, right? And so, you know, if you don't have that trust, you're not going to have the buy-in. And what they did is they had to change their plan. They had to change the plan. So they had to say goodbye to the consultants. And what they did is they hired from within the communities. And right now, the city has the neighborhood improvement services in the city of Durham has been, moving towards hiring community partners. And they have, incentivized leaders in different communities in different areas of Durham. In East Durham, they know who to go to, and they're like, can you help us, drive engagement and movement in whatever areas matter to the community. Some have, some of that work has led to, having education on different topics. Tree canopy projects have happened in the past in collaboration, of course, with Keep Durham Beautiful and many other Trees Durham. I mean, so many different nonprofits, but it is definitely about building up and building the leadership, that is already here. And that comes with trust, and that comes with networks and relationships that are already pretty tight. And so we can definitely leverage those. I think it's a good thing as we're doing, climate justice and environmental work, that we are definitely very keen on valuing those community relations.
If you don't mind my asking, and then I want to go on to Lily's question, but this is very much related to what you just said. So I'm just curious, given that framework that you're kind of outlining, how you think Durham, the city council, whoever ends up dealing with some of these things can do better, or what they should do to make sure that community voices are being heard. I just know some specific examples that I've heard. I think last year there was the whole participatory budgeting process, and a lot of people felt that it was not as representative or inclusive of, say, low-income communities or communities of color, just because of like when it was and how it worked, and it was majority white people going and participating in that. There's also like development in Durham. I think that's something you touch on with like tree cover canopy and trees getting cut down in communities of color. And I'm curious how you think the city can be doing better when they're already like taking steps like participatory budgeting. Or
I think, I mean, the approach of the PB, the intentionality behind that was, was good. I think that where it fell short was that, we have to really look at, I go again to sovereign logic. So I'm going to just kind of go back to that slide, with the sovereign logic, because that is, it says like, you have to listen, right? It's like they're sharing, and you have to listen and have reduce the isolation, right? Reduce that sense of isolation and increase the sense of belonging. What happened was a lot of the projects, including the projects that got awarded through PB, there was one, for example, I'll give you an example. Establishing cameras. I think all of Durham got to vote on what a community needed. And maybe that's a little bit of the issue, because for McDougal Terrace, for example, I got to vote. I lived in McDougal Terrace, so I could understand, what are some of the challenges, but I can't claim to know what the challenges today are. And I might know most of them, because some things, might be the same, but there are definitely differences, right? So I can't purport to speak, for McDougal Terrace, being that I'm not there like today, that last night Ashley couldn't sleep because there was gunshot violence. You know what I mean? That, her kids have had to go through therapy, like all these different things that are happening because of the community violence, because of the thing. So I can't purport to do that, but I can have relationship, I can listen. And in listening to many other community members that I talked to, I said, hey, the city, people in all of Durham got to vote for projects, and they chose to do one for you all that was cameras. And what I got in terms of like talking to my community members was like, who says we need cameras? Like, there might be some people that might think that cameras, but I mean, I can tell you, we have been asking for Wi-Fi. Like, we have been asking, our kids need Wi-Fi. Duke, give us Wi-Fi. Actually, I'll tell you that as a board member, one of the things that I want to see, because actually I'm holding my breath for this. I'm really waiting for this. There was an intention from Duke to partner with DPS, so that during this remote learning process, all affordable housing units would be wired for Wi-Fi. I mean, would have Wi-Fi. Every child who lives in subsidized housing, we don't need to wait to figure out like, internet services and how many like we already know, that many of those homes, some, are asking for this thing, and they have been asking for it for a while. So with PB, there was an option for Wi-Fi for Burton Park. It didn't make it because all of Durham decided that what McDougal Terrace needed was cameras. And and again, I'm not going to say that there weren't people who wanted cameras. I mean, as with anything, with voting, you know, you're going to get so many thousands, you know, votes for this and votes for that. But for the most part, when I talk to community members who live at McDougal, they said Wi-Fi was something they would have wanted. Why should somebody else make that decision for us, right? So maybe, you know, another iteration of that should be that maybe those communities, like those communities, there should be like a focus group of those communities of the focus group that will also get the conversations and the qualitative data and some of those ideas, and then, you know, match it with whatever else that the city wants to do, you know, in terms of, you know, the process by which people vote for stuff, and weigh them, you know, make sure that you establish sovereign. So I came back to this slide because of sovereign logic. It's all rooted in sovereignty. We have to believe in the sovereignty of communities to determine what is best for them.
Thank you so much for answering that. So Lily, your question was next, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm just curious. I have a lot to learn, but I'm wondering, as a member of the board, the school board, like, could you talk about addressing contaminants like lead in Durham schools? And have you heard anything from like community members about kids' exposure to like environmental problems and pollution and lead changing like being at home more? Because I'm sure some people have more exposure at home and some people have more exposure at school.
So yes, definitely, that's definitely a topic that I care a lot about. I know that Duke has done studies in the past, even with the intention, as I mentioned, even if the intention is good, there are ways to improve. I did hear, you know, from those studies that were done back, you know, decades ago, that there's a lot of resentment, you know, in terms of like the study and folks feeling like, you know, yeah, you can take all the data points from their house, but how much are they changing where they live? Like, are you going to be able to move them out of there? You know what I mean? It is a very sad thing when we think about, you know, the research, in the intersection of research and actually changing somebody's life, like the services that are provided. For places like McDougal Terrace, you know, I do know that, you know, that they talk about how they paint over it, you know, they painted over those installations. There have been folks that have done some testing around there, and I have not seen it pick up as much as it did at some point. Like, there were some studies, there were some people taking data. In other housing, it is a concern. I do think that that's kind of where we don't exist in a silo. So Durham Public Schools, we don't have power to tax. We don't get any revenue. You know, we have staff that, you know, are in charge of instruction. We're in charge of providing a sound and basic education. We're also, you know, there because we care about kids, and we can't turn an eye to these kind of situations. So that's where we look to public health. That's where DPS, one of the things that I have loved about, you know, in spite of all the mayhem and all the horrible things that are happening right now, it is the opportunity to hold everybody accountable and to bring the health department, to bring institutions like Duke and saying, how close are we to really serving our communities in the way that they deserve? You know, so those partnerships are going to be key. I think the health department is definitely interested in lead poisoning. It is something that folks can report. I mean, I think that as much as we embed that into the services, so like when Medicaid letters go out, you know, if you're concerned about lead poison, call this number, you know, like that needs to be automatic. And I know that they have done those attempts before, but I think that we definitely need to continue to drive that point that, you know, we need to make sure that we're all working cohesively together to address these issues, because it can't just rely on DPS. There are ways that DPS can help. Like, for example, we are responsible for lead in our buildings, you know, and so we just hired a person who is in charge of sustainability, and he's a director. His title is actually more into construction. So as we're building the new schools, there are things that they're taking into account in terms of sustainability. There are things that are yet to be achieved. Like, I would love for there to be all electric and for us to never use any gas, because I want us to be wired for solar panels. But we're not there yet. You know, we do have some electric wiring in terms of you know, systems, and so I'm excited about that. But I mean, like, we still have some work to do, right? I'd love for our schools to be already solar ready, but we're moving in that direction slowly. I will say that your point about kids being in you know, exposure to pollution, we need that. We need to definitely see the impact. And I think the data right now, I mean, it's like we have yet to see what is the complete impact on students, from, you know, from food security to air pollution to developmental effects, from, you know, not being able to have social emotional development through interactions, right? Like we have so many different things that we have to start looking at, but yeah, it's going to take a lot of folks looking into all these different things, and definitely those partnerships, as I mentioned.
So Ashley, you were next, and I think you're asking a really important question here, Ashley. I think it's the crux of what we want people to take away from tonight's session.
Hi, thank you so much for being here tonight to share your work with us. My question was, what can we as students, as members of like the Duke and Durham community, do to get involved and like address some of the energy, housing, and discrimination issues that you brought up tonight?
So one of the things is, folks who are most proximate to the pain should be most proximate to the power, right? Ayanna Presley says something like that, and probably not the exact quote, but we need to make sure that we get these people, we need to get these residents, right, who have this lived experience onto these boards. We need, the boards of all these different communities. When you have, commissions, panels, boards, or whatever, like we need to be really inclusive. And how do you get involved with energy, housing? So for energy, to address some of the energy stuff, Duke Power has some energy programs. Not a lot of people know about them. We have Latinx businesses who don't even know that they qualify for energy programs, energy saving programs. Whether it's LED lights, whatever it is, like whatever, I think that it is about relationship. Like if you patronize any of these buildings, these businesses, and you go there and you notice styrofoam, they might tell you why they're using styrofoam. They'll tell you why. They'll tell you because it's cheaper, right? And because, small businesses, especially now with COVID, I mean, they've been so impacted. So they're looking at the bottom line. They're trying to make it. A lot of businesses have closed. So if there is a way that, you're connected to resources, to funders that might have a project where it's like, hey, you don't have to worry about it. Whatever the excess is, like, it'll be covered. Like it should not cost you more to use more sustainable, materials, right? So there are definitely ways to do that. I would say really connect. I just tell people all the time, don't be afraid to connect. Learn the story, like share your story. Because the other thing is, this is not about extraction. It's not one-sided. I did share a little bit about what I do. I'd love to hear from you about what you do, and feel free to reach out. But that's one of the ways. Housing, it's the same thing. I'm very happy that we have the DCL, the Durham Community Land Trustees. I think they do great work. I think we need to expand those kind of initiatives for affordable housing. We also have the affordable housing bond. We need to make sure that it does what we intended to do. And discrimination issues that we talk about, that's going to take all of us to really ensure that we are, that we're not staying silent when we see discrimination happening. That we are, in Durham Public Schools, I tell my parents, call me anytime. If there's anything, an instance when you're going to a school and this is happening, I've had parents being turned away because there's nobody here in the building who speaks Spanish, and that's not okay. I have talked to the superintendent about these things, and he has assured me, and so has the central office assured me, everybody in whatever language they can, send an email, and we have to figure it out. As a district, we will figure out how to connect to the Multilingual Resource Center that will translate it and get it back, but nobody should feel like they don't qualify to give feedback because of a language barrier. Like, we're reducing the barriers, we're working towards having more supports in language access. But I just tell parents, like, just feel empowered, use your voice. Tell us what's going on in whatever way possible. And in the same way for you all, use Google Translate if you have to, you can chat on Google Translate. You could do that back and forth. You could do 15 minutes of Duolingo and try out your Spanish, and reach out to somebody and have a conversation and figure out what they care about in ways that maybe you can connect to something that, whether it's resources or research that you can look into. I think conversations, connection, and hearing each other's stories are going to change a lot of these social justice issues.
Thank you so much. I know we are over time here, so I do want to give Alexandra the opportunity to answer the last couple questions. I think they tied into Ashley's question a bit. Let me just go. One of them was mine. So thoughts on your housing, the ownership issue, I guess, housing ownership as a climate issue. I was curious how, if you had any thoughts on a solution for that. I think you just mentioned some solutions that Durham itself is trying to implement, but as issues around gentrification becomes ever more present in Durham and people getting displaced, not as a result of any particular like carbon monoxide or any particular environmental issue, but because their property taxes are going up, they can no longer afford to live where they're living. And that's especially pervasive in low-income communities and communities of color. So I'm just curious as to the housing issue. Housing is a big issue in Durham, it sounds like. And if you had any thoughts on that specifically, since that was something you emphasized earlier.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, we can do a lot of things on the back end. Like I know that, part of the work was to ask the county to put some funds towards, tax relief for homeowners so that they didn't have to lose their houses. And so, and that is a great initiative. It's on the back end. It's like when people are already like, dealing with these issues. One of the questions that in our conversations with county commissioners, one county commissioner asked, it's like, who are we really talking about here? Like who are the funds really going to go to? How many, what is the demographic breakdown of those people who will be accessing these funds to preserve their homes? And that is a good question because that data, although it is available, it normally doesn't make it to the presentations. When you see a number, it's like, we have like 25% of whatever the number is. Like, tell us more about that number, right? Tell us more about who are we really talking about? Are we talking about, Black homeowners? Are we talking about Latinx homeowners? Are we talking about white homeowners? The help is there, the resources are there, we can definitely distribute, but it does tell us what the patterns are when we start looking at demographics. And in terms of home ownership, I think that, it has gotten better over the years in terms of like Latinx home ownership, but it is still very low. And it has to do with, many different factors. I mean, as I mentioned, it just, you zoom all the way out and you start looking at school to prison pipeline, like how many of our kids really come, start DPS and come out on the back end and are actually ready, to be financially solvent, and so, but we start looking at like loans. What are the loan practices? What is required to have a loan? I know that there were programs back in the day that would accept tax IDs for home ownership. Things do change. Things are a little different. Habitat for Humanity has been a great program, but they also have, like the requirements and 2 years of like having stable income. If you're undocumented, you don't qualify for a Habitat for Humanity home. And so, it's these kind of things about like, what are the requirements? So still a lot of work to be done. I think that, we do need to follow homeownership. It's definitely a metric when you look at research, when people start looking at what are those, factors, confounding factors and all that. Homeownership is definitely one of those, important factors when we start, looking at data. So I think we're really good to support initiatives towards affordable housing. Let's continue to, hold our elected officials accountable, including hold me accountable, as we start addressing affordable housing in Durham. Although I don't get to do affordable housing, I get to do education, but I'm just saying, like, hold all elected officials accountable.
Thank you for answering that. Rashida, I think your question was next, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, so like sort of a running theme within like the folks that we've like come to like to talk to us, and just like sort of within our class discussions is like how do we sort of situate ourselves as like Duke students within sort of the city of Durham and within sort of the greater idea of like climate justice and environmental justice. So I guess my question to you is sort of and you sort of mentioned this with like the Wi-Fi and whatever, how like Duke like pulled out or like, as Duke does, sort of how is Duke as an institution like complicit or complacent and sort of like causing some of the issues that we've talked about, like with like affordable housing, gentrification, and like also just sort of like their relationship with DPS as well. Yeah.
Whew, okay, so did I tell you guys that I work for Duke too? Well, I work for the Boost Science program at Duke. I will tell you that I will hold Duke accountable if programs like the Boost Science program, which is to give opportunities for DPS kids to come into, like, it's a pipeline program, right? If they decide that all of the programs that they have are good, but you have a unique program that is working with underserved communities And if that program goes away, I'll be like, okay, Duke, this is not okay. In the same way that it's not okay, you know, for them to back out of the Wi-Fi for, you know, subsidized housing units. I mean, we were looking at that, like we have over 1,000 students, you know, that were looking for this. It is a game changer. They need this. And, you know, DPS, we bought those hotspots, but there's a lot of complexity with that. You know, some hotspots work well, others, you know, they get lost, or, you know, there's so much with that. I mean, just build the infrastructure for people to have access to Wi-Fi. The other one, of course, you know, I'm not going to talk about the light rail, but I mean, it just goes back to like many different things that the community has asked for, and reasons why Duke hasn't done it. But one of the ones that stands out for me right now with COVID is, you know, the slow response towards testing availability. And I am really grateful that Duke students have had access to testing, COVID testing. It is something that, you know, I applaud Duke for opening the Holton Career Center, Resource Center site. That is definitely a good initiative, because initially the choices were Walgreens and CVS. We're talking about pharmaceutical companies. We're talking about pharmacies that are private businesses driving a public health, you know, initiative that needs to be accessible to everybody. So I'm still holding Duke to, Duke, when are you going to have the mobile clinics? You know, when are you going to have like really focus on testing for the community for the COVID pandemic? So there's definitely ways that we need to push that. I'm very glad that Duke is changing finally the My Chart, you know, like access, like if you're a Duke patient and you're Spanish speaking, for all this time, everything has been in English, and it's a slow thing. They haven't changed it yet. I mean, I have yet to see my chart, you know, have language access on it, but slow things that are happening. The website, I'd love for Duke to have, you know, information in Spanish. DPS has done it. I'm very glad, you know, to say that DPS now has a Spanish website that has resources, that has, you know, links to articles, links to information. I think we need to start moving in that direction. I mean, when we think about health institutions, the health of all our community members, you know, is very important. And so, you know, if you're a hospital, if you provide health services, if you're in a university, you know, that is looking to do research with community members, you know, make sure that your platforms, that your website, you know, is inclusive. It does, you know, promote language access and just access to resources in general. Like as I mentioned, it's all about the resources, right, that we have and what we do with them, and how we ensure that we are moving towards green, you know, sustainable practices in everything that we do.
So I believe our last question is from Tom, if he's still here, if you want to unmute yourself.
Okay, I'm on. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Question was, you know, I liked your thought that everybody was an expert in something. And I'm just wondering if there's a few people in your community or any community you care to name that would have some expertise in construction matters, basically, and you know, be able to walk through and spend a little time in a building and see if there's any major problems like some of those that you mentioned, like the big leak. You know, if that had been caught when it first got started, you know, that it would be so much easier to settle financially and every other way, probably. And then there's things that in relation, I'm not sure I got the full impact of your thoughts on the tree cover, but I do think tree cover is important. And I know I rely on what I've got to shade the house and therefore not use as much air conditioning in the summer. And the nice thing about leaves that drop off is that then they let the light in, and the light makes the heat in the house in the wintertime, and it all works out just about right if you have the trees in the right place, the right kind of trees. And people aren't necessarily going to think of all that coming to a new area, or if they haven't been homeowners before. You got to, it takes a number of years. I've lived in this house about 45 years and learned a lot from it. And it's a lot different. Trees in the back grew a lot in that amount of time. And you couldn't go out on the deck in the afternoon when I first moved here, but now it's cool and shady all the time. So I do think that in Greensboro, for instance, we have a non-governmental organization that is really into housing and is an advocate for people that don't know as much as they do and share their experience. And I don't know if Durham has anybody like that or not, but if not, it'd be a good time to start one.
I agree. Definitely, you know, community support is so important. Like, for example, I talked to Miss Vanessa Evans in Bragtown. That has been an area that has been underdeveloped. And as you know, Bragtown is the area where the alternative school for DPS, kids who get suspended, they go to Lakeview. It has Oxford Manor, a subsidized housing apartment complex there. You know, it's one of the oldest neighborhoods. I mean, they have like a railroad track, and it has never gotten the level of, you know, investment. But all of a sudden, developers were coming, right? And what is interesting about what you're mentioning is that, you know, Ms. Vanessa Evans and her community, they have been going to city council, they have been going to the planning commission, talking about the impact that, you know, developers could have in that area. But she has also partnered with EQUA, Ellerby Creek Watershed Association. They have, you know, she has other projects that she wants to do there, even as they're fighting off the, you know, development further down the line where her land is. She has cisterns. She has like 2 cisterns, and she wants to do a community garden. And so EQUA, you know, has been partnering with her and is you know, helping out with figuring out how to do the ducts so that like a system that, you know, could get the water from the cistern and water the community garden. Those are things that, you know, like she is open to community partnerships for that. I think that, you know, the opportunity presents itself, and then people who have the expertise and the resources should definitely, like, you know, find ways to pitch in. Sometimes it is, like I said, it's a matter of talking to folks, keeping your ears open for those opportunities. Now, I do want to ensure that we are holding landlords, you know, accountable. There have just been so many complaints against this realtor, this company. They're the landlords of where this case is, that it's time and time again. And so we have to figure out, like, at the system level, at the level of the system, how to ensure that when there are these leaks, when there are these issues, that the landlords are, you know, taking care of what they have to take care of. And if it's a homeowner, I agree with you. We need to set up you know, the kind of supports from the community to be able to help community homeowners figure out some of these repairs and how to do that. But it is a sad situation when a tenant is caught between the city, who is like, you know, the city's like, they're charging him the bills, and the landlord is like not responsive, and so the bill is falling on the tenant. And it is just a sad thing, because, you know, when you talk about the power dynamics, who has the most power? City, landlord, and then you have the tenant. It's yeah. But thank you for that. I really appreciate it. If you have the name of that you know, organization in Greensboro, I'd love to check them out. And
I will send you a couple. In fact, a group that I work with here is starting what we are calling the Enlivening Neighborhood Project. And I think there's some connections to Durham in that too, with some of the people. But anyway, we're going to have, you know, neighborhood meetings and try to get people organized to the point where they can deal with the coming encirclement that's going to be completed right in their backyards by the bypass, the Beltway.
wow, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. Like I said, I learned a lot from you all. Just really grateful to be here, and thank you for all your questions. yeah, feel free to reach out. You know, I'm also on social media. I'm not socially averse to connecting. So, you know, I'm on Instagram, Facebook. My Twitter is not as active as it could be, but I'm on Twitter as well. So check me out on Twitter, and let me know if there's any specific things that you're interested in. You know, because right now there's voting efforts that I'm involved in. You know, there's like I said, the flea market, you know, work, as we try to figure out, like, you know, what the city's going to do with that plot of land, and how to continue to support these community members and parents. There's a work around, you know, immigration stuff, you know, like the folks who have lost their temporary protected status have been here for decades. Some of them are, you know, some of our homeowners who have lost there's so much in terms of that, you know, folks that move here because of climate change, because, you know, because of so much, whether it's flooding or hurricanes or whatever it is, and they got provisions that are now expired. So yes, so lots of things to talk about. I'd love to talk about any topic. Reach out, and thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much for your time, Alexandra. And thank you all for joining us for this amazing talk. I hope you enjoyed it. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. So we will send a follow-up with your information, Alexandra, to everybody, and the recording today. And I suppose everyone have a great week.